We're rolling. All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So my name is Courtney. I'm the manager of weed biosecurity and bush regen at ROUS. So I'm just going to give you a little talk about the weed invasion curve, which is, I guess, the way that ROUS County Council prioritises weed management. Here it is, my lovely assistant here showing you. So, as you're probably all aware, there are hundreds of different weeds out there, and we obviously can't target them all. So what we try and do is come up with a bit of a system about how we will target certain weeds, and then what we will do about other weeds as well. So I guess back in the day, you gentlemen probably would know the council, ROUS County Council, or Far North Coast County Council as it was then, would go out and they would basically spray every single weed under the sun, you know, using lots of chemicals, etc., etc. Well, this is the thing. So eventually they realised, hang on a minute, this is probably not the best way to go about targeting weeds, because we go out, we spray, and then they get replaced by other weeds. So what they have done is they've come up with the best return on your investment. Just like anything, we know we talk about biosecurity a lot at the moment with COVID and etc., etc. It's just like a disease. Well, the best way to manage an outbreak is obviously not to get it in the first place. So a bit like our borders at the moment with all the COVID stuff, we're trying to prevent biosecurity material from entering Australia. So in this case, COVID. Same with weeds. So what we're trying to do is stop weeds from entering our area. Okay, so they roughly say that every dollar you invest in preventing a weed is $100 return on your investment. So yep, so we do a lot of stuff in the prevention stuff. How do we do that? Well, we partner with, you know, our friends at state government, lots of different agencies, Gold Coast Council, Scenic Rim Council, you know, all the other councils that border us, and we share information with them. So we're asking them, you know, what weeds have you got that we don't, that we should be looking out for, and vice versa. We're giving them information about, you know, here's a weed that we've got in our area that you don't have in your area. This is what you should be looking out for. This is where we found it turning up in our area. So these are where you probably should be going out and inspecting and looking for these things. So yeah, prevention, really important. So ROUS does a lot of work in the prevention stuff. Once a weed gets here, it enters into the eradication phase. So these are weeds that have, the ones that we were trying to prevent, obviously something slipped through the net. We found an infestation because we're out there inspecting for these weeds. We found an infestation. It's now gone from a prevention, because obviously it's here, to an eradication. So when it enters the eradication phase, these are the weeds that are present in very small numbers, so isolated infestations. Hopefully you only find one, you might find a couple of infestations at the same time. And then what ROUS County Council does is we try and knock those weeds out straight away. So what we're trying to do by this approach is stop the next camphor laurel or the next lantana, or, you know, the next big widespread weed. Okay, if we can knock it out early, we get a great return on our investment. So once you start to get up the curve here, you enter the containment phase. I'll keep going. You enter the containment phase. So these are now, you're entering weeds that are quite widespread, present in quite high numbers, lots of different infestations. So we can't eradicate them because they're already too far gone. So what we then try and do with containment is stop those infestations from entering areas where they're not. So a good one at the moment that we're trying to tackle would be a giant devil's fig. Now we know in certain areas within our area it's fairly widespread, like in Tweed, Lismore areas, but however in Kyogle and Richmond Valley it's not as widespread. So what we're trying to do is stop the giant devil's fig from entering those areas, and the way we do that is obviously we work with landowners, etc., etc., to try and minimize the impacts and stop it spreading further into our region. Okay, and then the final bit on the invasion curve is our asset protection. So asset protection weeds are the weeds that are very widespread, We obviously can't eradicate them. It's not really worth us investing a lot of our resources into trying to, you know, get landowners to control them, etc., etc. So now we're providing advice to people, and we're asking landowners to clear the weeds on their own properties. However, we're not going to enforce control of these weeds, because obviously we'd spend our budgets pretty quickly. We don't have that much resources. But also we can start to look at things like biocontrol. If there's biocontrol agents, we can get hold of those and get them out into the community, stuff like that. And protecting priority assets. So what are priority assets? Things like our rivers, national parks, you know, areas of beauty, that sort of stuff, high agricultural value lands, that sort of stuff. So we're starting to move into asset protection, giving out information on how to control them. Now you're probably all very confused and thinking, well, which weeds sit in which thing, because there's about, you know, 350 different weeds. Well, it's my regional plan. So there is a regional weed management plan, okay? So if you get yourself a copy of this, you can download it on websites, etc. We've got a few hard copies over there if you want to take with you. It's a really good plan. It actually tells you about all our approach, what we're supposed to do, what things are actually listed in legislation, and which things are listed in the regional plan, which is done by the Regional Weeds Committee. But the most important bit, which everyone will be really interested in, is all the weeds in the back here. There's the name of all the weeds, where they sit in the regional plan, and what landowners are supposed to do on their land to carry out their biosecurity duty. I won't go into legislation too much because it does get very confusing. So yeah, if you go to this strategy here, it's a really quick, easy guide so you know what you're supposed to be doing on your land.
What's that called again, that book, if we were to download it?
It's called the North Coast Regional Strategic Weed Management Plan, and you can have a copy. I'll sign it for you later if you want.
Thanks, buddy.
So yeah, another good
Photos on the internet of what...
So I'll get to this next bit. So there's another thing as well. So that regional plan, fantastic, really good guide. However, people have said, well, if I don't know, if there's not a photo, how do, you know, I don't know the name of it, how am I supposed to find it? So another great resource that our cousins in DPI have come up with is called the New South Wales weedwise app. So there's a free app that you can download, which basically tells you all of that information about the weeds that are in that plan, but it also shows you pictures of what it looks like. It'll have pictures of similar looking things that people can get confused with, you know, this one and this one. It's got all your control options, so how you can kill the weed, what different chemicals might be available, etc., etc. What your biosecurity duty is, so as a landowner, whether you're supposed to report it to council, whether you're supposed to eradicate it from your land, etc., etc. It's all on that New South Wales weedwise app. Any questions?
Do you want to talk about biocontrol a bit?
So biocontrol, so yeah, we partner with, in fact, funnily enough, that was the biocontrol coordinator for New South Wales who was at the stall just 2 seconds ago. So we do have access to biocontrol agents. So there's a research facility down at Grafton, the DPI research facilities down there, where they breed a lot of these biocontrol agents, and we can get access to that. So if you have one of the weeds that there are biocontrol available in the plan or on the app, you can contact us at Rouse County Council. We can put your name down on the list, and then when these agents become available, when they've bred them up down at the research station, we can liaise with you and get some biocontrol from the research station. And if your property is obviously suitable for a release of biocontrol agents, we can come out and release them on your property.
So you're saying that they don't enforce weed control?
They do enforce weed control, but we enforce weed control around this area. So once it starts to get to here, like lantana, fireweed, that sort of stuff, that's widespread stuff, so we won't enforce control of that, just because we wouldn't get very far. Or if we started to try and enforce lantana, we'd pretty much have to fine everyone. So we don't put our resources. There's only 5 inspectors for this whole area, for all 6 of these local government areas. So we've got a really big area to cover with 5 inspectors. So again, they're concentrating on this prevention eradication stuff, and trying to get landowners to get rid of that, and then providing advice, asking them very nicely to get rid of their fireweed and that, but we're not going to keep going back and fining them for it.
So they don't do the property inspections anymore?
Yeah. So we do about 6,000 property inspections a year, again over this area. But again, we're looking for prevention species, eradication species, and enforcing control and eradicate contain. So if we went to asset protection, a weed inspector will find a weed on everybody's property, guaranteed. Yeah. So we'd pretty much just be handing out fines left, right and centre. We don't want to do that. We want to work with the community. Once you start to enforce control of these widespread stuffs, it gets very hard to prove that there's a biosecurity risk on that person's property, especially if it's widespread, because a lawyer will say, well, it's there. Why have you enforced control? Why are you picking on my client?
So how do you find out which are the preventable?
So there's the stuff there in that book, that handout, but also you can go to that app if you want, the weedwise app, and all the weeds are listed in there, and there will be all the prevention and eradicate species.
We've actually got some examples just over there.
There are some examples of our prevention and eradication. Well, obviously not prevention because they're here. I brought them here. But yeah, there's lots of material over there as well. You can also contact local land services. It used to be CMA, who are, I guess, the lead authority for the regional weed committee. So they'll also be able to give you advice about what's prevention, what's eradication, etc., etc.
What are a few of the weeds that you do go onto people's properties and find them?
At the moment, so there's a ministerial control order for tropical soda apple, so that's a non-negotiable. Every control authority in New South Wales has to go on and enforce control of tropical soda apple. So that's one that we do. You can see them later. So that's one that they would do. Paper mulberry, they would enforce control. Hymenacne, they would force control. There's quite a number of them, probably about 20 of them. Groundsel, again, we're starting to come up into this containment stuff. So they might enforce control if you are the only property who's got groundsel bush and nobody else in the area has got groundsel bush. They'll enforce control and say, there's a biosecurity risk here by you not getting rid of yours because nobody else has got it. However, if everybody's got it, they'll say, look, we'll give you information, please can you get rid of your groundsel bush, but we're not going to come back and start fining 20 different people. Yeah.
What was the one they found in the organic chip field?
So a new one, so a prevention species called Parthenium Wheat. So it's one that's fairly widespread up in Queensland. However, there was no known infestations here in New South Wales. And we found our first site maybe 6 to 12 months ago, something like that, up in Tweed area. And it was brought in through seed that was in organic chook food that had been shipped down from Queensland. And obviously they were out feeding the chickens, blah, 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 blah. And then all this Parthenium weed, which obviously they didn't know what it was, just started coming up everywhere. And they contacted us and said, there's a weed, I don't know what it is, it's just popped up. We went up and it was Parthenium weed, which is a prevention. There's not supposed to be any of that in New South Wales. Yeah.
And that poses health risk for livestock and for humans as well?
Yeah, so you get respiratory problems, lots of people get skin rashes and itching and stuff like that from Parthenium, so it's a really bad one, we really don't want it here. So yeah, that's why we try and eradicate it as quickly as possible, because we really don't want it here.
So you mentioned tropical soda apple. Does giant devil's fig fall in that same?
No, so giant devil's fig would probably fit into the containment stuff because it is fairly widespread, in Tweed and in Lismore. That's probably, so that giant devil's fig, funnily enough, turned up probably my first year. I've been here for 12 years. And when I first turned up, they were talking about giant devil's fig and saying, hey, we found this, this stuff, it seems to be really spreading up at Tunnable Creek area. And we actually contacted DPI, and this is when it was the old Noxious Weeds Act, and said, there's this giant devil's fig, it seems to be, it's getting pretty bad up here. Can we push for declaration of the weed? However, by the time that DPI had gone through the minister, etc., and got into the Noxious Weeds Act, it was 4 years later. So with the introduction of the new Biosecurity Act, it gives the power to control authorities that we don't have to wait for it to be listed. If there's a biosecurity risk being imposed by the plant, we can jump on it straight away and just say there's a biosecurity risk, we must get rid of it. We have to have bit of evidence that it's going to be a biosecurity risk, but yeah, it's allowed us now with the introduction of this new act that we don't have to wait for it to be listed by DPI. We can actually jump on it straight away.
But it's not seen as threatening as tropical soda.
No, so if you went to other areas, you know, maybe Clarence, coughs, etc., where it's not quite as widespread, they would probably be seeing it as a trying to prevent it from getting to their area. I think there are 1 or 2 isolated infestations down there, but yeah, they would be trying to prevent giant devil's fig from getting into their area. So yep, they would be enforcing control of any giant devil's fig that came in down there, because they have isolated infestations. Yeah. So yeah, that's probably, I would say that was the last one that got away from ROUS with the, you know, back in the old way. So now we're a lot more proactive instead of reactive. So we're out there, as I say, getting the information from all these other control authorities, like the Parthenium Wheat. What should we be looking out for? What are the dangers, etc., etc. Where's it likely to show up? Get all that information, and then we're out inspecting those areas. And that's basically how we came across this Parthenium stuff. Was somebody said you should be checking, you know, places with chook food, places with machinery, etc., etc. So then we have an inspection program. We go out and we inspect all these areas, and bang, there it is. So we can jump on that quickly. Yeah. Now I'm really hungry because I've been watching you two eat in the whole of my talk.
So are you actually with the council, or are you with the Lands Board, or?
With the council, ROUS County Council. Yeah. Yep.
ROUS, when it comes to the weeds, we work really closely with Local Land Services, which is an arm of the Department of Primary Industry.
Yep, and Department of Primary Industries as well. Yep.
And that relationship is, we're on the ground, we're doing the operational work, but we also do a lot of the communication engagement.
So things like alligator weed and that
Yep.
sort of stuff, is that still prevalent in the valley?
Yes, so alligator weed's still in our rivers. So we were getting on top of alligator weed. The infestation numbers were reducing quite dramatically. And the area of the infestations in the Wilsons were reducing quite dramatically. Then we had a flood in 2017, and that just spread it everywhere. And so we were back to square one. A constant frustration, but that's part of where we live. You know, we get droughts, we've had fires, we get a lot of flooding. So just as you think you're getting on top of something, there'll be some sort of weather event or something which will put you back, you know, put you back again. But Clarence, I don't believe so. I know Coffs has got some. We've got some, but I haven't heard of any in the Clarence. Is that where you're from?
Yeah.
I could find out if you...
No, that's okay. No, it's just a question. I just wondered if it came up in discussion sometimes.
Yeah, okay. Not that I'm aware of.
Never seen any on our river.
Yeah, not that I'm aware of. There may be possibly isolated infestations, maybe in people's dams or something like that. You know, something's brought it in accidentally, but I haven't heard of any in the Clarence.
Is that the aquarium one?
Yeah, alligator weed. So it's the one with the white papery flower that I did the brilliant video about. Yeah.
Apparently it went crazy, didn't it?
Yes. There is actually a biocontrol for alligator weed that they use up in Queensland to some success, but I don't think it's actually registered for us to use down here, which is quite frustrating. But yeah, it is biocontrol, but it's one we still think we've got a chance of eradicating. Hopefully, fingers crossed. As long as we don't keep getting these big weather events like that 2017 flood. It went from being in the river, you know, some areas it was 3 kilometres into people's paddocks, you know, with that flood. So then that you were searching the sort of this area, now you're searching something this big.
We seem to get some new exotic every time.
Yes, we do. Yep. So we get approximately about 3 new weed incursions in the Northern Rivers area every year. Yep. So the further south you go, you know, you'd be lucky if they got 1 every 10 years, new infestation. But just because of where we live, our proximity to the Queensland border, where a lot of these weeds come from, a lot of travel, perfect conditions, weeds just love it here. You know, if something's going to grow, it's going to grow in the Northern Rivers.